Well, this morning, CNN has learned that President Trump has reviewed attack plans for Iran, but a source tells us that the president is holding off to see if Tehran will step back from its nuclear program. Joining us now is CNN senior military analyst, retired Admiral James Stavridis, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander who is now a partner at the Carlyle Group, a global investment firm. Admiral, thank you for being here with us. A lot to talk about. First off, what do you think the factors are going into the president's thinking as he weighs military options here?
I think all presidents begin with pros and cons. The pro is pretty obvious here. U.S. has the ability, using these big bunker busting bombs we're talking about constantly, in all probability to take out definitively the beating heart of the Iranian nuclear program at Fordow. That's a big pro. The con, the risk, is tactical. Could a B-2 bomber get shot down? Could a fighter get taken out while escorting? Could the Iranians lash out at U.S. bases, U.S. partners in the region, go after oil fields? Could they close the Strait of Hormuz? There's a lot of cons here. I think it's a close call for the president. At this point, Pamela, I would say there's a 2 in 3 chance he will go ahead and strike. I think there's a 1 in 3 chance he'll give it a bit more time and see how diplomacy plays out. You can make a case on either side of that decision.
What makes you say you think there's a 2 in 3 chance he would go for it?
One is the way we have aggressively set the table. All the forces are in place, and operations like that tend to create a momentum of their own. Secondly, widely reported, a lot of advice he's receiving from people he really trusts in national security, like Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Tom Cotton, General Eric Kurilla. I think there's a growing body of advice to him to conduct the strike. And third and finally, he looks at it through the prism of domestic politics. Here again, pro and con. Many of his supporters are against getting involved in the Middle East, but I think he may make the calculation a quick, certain strike will in fact be well received. It'll be a sign of strength. So I think those are the 3 reasons it's a 2 in 3 chance that he decides ultimately to take the shot.
And sources are telling us that the president has said that he does not believe the U.S. strike necessarily means a complete U.S. intervention in a foreign war. What do you think?
I hope that turns out to be the case. The problem is if we conduct the strike and then Iran retaliates, and let's imagine a world in which their retaliation takes out a U.S. warship or a U.S. flagged tanker, or they strike a U.S. embassy, or they close the Strait of Hormuz, then you're in a ladder of vertical escalation that'll be hard to avoid. So it's always pleasant to think that you can do these strikes as a one and done. The problem is what happens next. That's what would concern me. Vertical escalation. We get dragged into a broader war.
And from our reporting, the president has been thinking about what happened in his first term when he gave the okay for the assassination of Soleimani. And there was a lot of warning then that this could lead to, a broader conflict and lead to a major escalation. And the fears then didn't come to fruition, although there was, of course, assassination concerns from Iran toward Trump. But what do you think about that being part of the calculation here?
Iran is in a very different place now. Although they are weakened, ironically perhaps, I think that gives them less to lose. And as a result, I think if we did jump in and conduct the strike, I think it's pretty good odds you would see an escalatory response from the Iranians. There are a lot of targets they can strike. And if that happens, I think the president is going to have to take the next step and the next one. As always, when you start a war, and I've been involved in a lot of wars, when you start a war, it's like kicking a door open into a completely dark room. You really don't know what's in there. Once you release ordnance, once you launch that first B-2, there's a lot of variability to how things unfold at that point.
Right, and there's really no certainty, right? If you do launch the B-2 with this bunker busting bomb, as we've been calling it, that's never been used, there's no certainty if it would wipe out Fordo, right?
Correct. And then there's a second order concern here, which is the spread of radioactive material. Do you create, in effect, a kind of dirty bomb by hitting Fordow? The good news in this regard is that it's 200 feet deep. Hopefully it's fairly contained. But if you're using that bunker busting bomb, it's going to open a pathway for that enriched uranium to simply float up into the air currents. That's a real worry, and I'm sure that's been part of the conversation in the Situation Room as well.
Yeah, we have some good reporting on that from our Jennifer Hansler about that concern. I also want to ask you about the Israeli drone that Iran says it shot down with its air defense system. Israel says one of its drones was shot down in the area. We're looking at some video right here. What does this tell you about various reports that Iran's air defenses are largely gutted? You just heard the president say yesterday that Iran doesn't have air defenses.
I think Iran remains capable, but at the level of 10 to 20% of their previous capabilities. So almost all of their air-to-air, so their jets, their fighters have been hit. Almost all of their really advanced air defense systems, like the Russian-supplied S-300s, have been hit. But there are always going to be some residual level of air capability that could take out, particularly something like a drone, which is slow moving, not stealthy particularly. That could be taken out, frankly, by a shoulder fired missile. So there's still 10 to 20%. And again, part of the calculus for the president is, do they have the ability to take out a B-2 bomber? I think that's very unlikely. Could a lucky shot occur? Possibly. Again, a lot of factors going into this very tough decision for the president.
And just to be clear, it would be a two-person crew, right, in the B-2 bomber? Yeah.
It would be, and recall that there are also typically fighter jets would be alongside it in order to make sure some Iranian aircraft didn't get up and challenge the B-2. So there'll be not just the B-2 with two people. There'll be fighters, there'll be tankers, the Israelis will be flying. It'll be a fairly complex air picture. Typically, we would have a large air early warning aircraft, probably from one of the carriers, an E-2 Hawkeye would manage that battle space. But it's not as simple as just pointing a B-2 at Fordow. It's a big, complex operation.
All right, retired Admiral James Stavridis, thank you for coming on, for all of your experience over the years, sharing this with us as we continue to watch this unfolding crisis in the Middle East. We appreciate it. We'll be right back.